So in this video, I want to talk about two particular topics, and the first one is of course cut content, because that is of course what many people want to talk about, and I will be talking about light novel cut content and web novel cut content. So thank you to the person in the comment section on my last video for explaining the web novel cut content, because I did not know that there was in fact actually cut content from web novel to light novel, and then from light novel to anime. And then of course I will be discussing about the episode as well, and some of the particular things that have been brought up in discussions. Of course, my previous video I brought out yesterday, which is discussing about the relationship between Rudy and Sylphiette, and that big long build up to them finally reigniting in a proper fashion, not in the sense of, oh, Rudy doesn't know what's going on and he only knows Fitz as he, and now discovering it's a she, and then discovering Fitz is actually in fact Sylphiette. So that was a scene that I've always enjoyed, and I loved the build up to it. Of course, they ended it on a very specific point to basically drop you on a cliffhanger, so you're ready for next week for the conclusion to Core 1 of Season 2, ready for Core 2 coming out in April of next year. So the first thing I want to talk about is the cut content itself. So the first thing to talk about is a particular scene where Sylphia is walking into the hall and she's basically approaching Rudy, asking about the job that she has got, which is basically the plan that Ariel and Fitz or Sylphia have brought up to try and bring them together to finally make that confession that she needs to make. And during that situation, this is where it's cut, that it basically shows a little bit of an extra part where from Rudy's perspective, he is actually talking to Zanaba, and as I like to call him, Spaghetti, where they're talking about making figures, and basically they're discussing about making figures of his fiancée, Kirishi, if I pronounce that right, during her entire phases. So not just the young phase where she's in a lolly form, but also her adult form as well. So there's something of history to show of her growing up. So there's multiple phases, like her younger form when she's basically reborn, and then the different stages all the way out to her adult form, because of course she has a tendency to die quite a lot, so it ends up always resetting her back to her younger form. So Rudy brought up the idea of being like, hey, why don't we make a figure of her different forms? But he brings up the fact that by the time she does become an adult, Rudy will be long dead because of the life cycle of how they work. So Rudy mentions the idea of teaching his skills to the next generation and passing that technique on, so that those people can then pass it on as needed until they are ready to make the figure of his fiancée when she is in that form. So it's like history preserved. And that's basically what they're discussing about, is basically figures in itself, basically bringing each stage of her life / body to basically so that it's captured for everyone to see throughout history. And I think it's really cool. I think it's a nice scene. It would have been nice to see in the anime, because it's just a nice interaction between them, like bros kind of talking some interesting stuff out about the figures. But nonetheless, you can read the light novels and get the full scope of that. The other piece of cut content is actually from the web novel. Now, I didn't know about this because I've only read the light novels, and this is actually the first plan that they actually came up with before they did the whole situation with the forest and the cave, which this never happens in the light novel. So they basically just go from their discussion straight into the forest. But in the web novel, there is one plan before that, which is basically they tell Rudy that the dormitories are basically in a bad state, so Sylphia or Fitz has to sleep in the same room as Rudy. And so basically the whole plan is to kind of have her reveal herself to Rudy in that room. But ends up what happening, Rudy ends up leaving to go hang out with Zanaba, and then ends up leaving Sylphia or Fitz in the room on their own. Fitz is basically naked, waiting for Rudy, but Rudy ends up rocking up and knocking on the door. She panics, thinking it's someone else, puts her clothes back on, Rudy walks in, and it's too late at that point. So it's basically an absolute failed disaster plan, which is why they go with plan 2. Knowing that actually happens in the web novel, I can see why it's skipped, because as much as it seems funny, it seems kind of pointless at the same time, and it honestly is a really terrible plan. It's better to kind of draw Rudy out on his own, specifically Riv, like the second plan is, draw them out and then create the event in itself in its most pure sense, with the rain and making Rudy have to undress. And that is something that some manga fans have pointed out, that they think that actually the manga did it better. Now, again, I've not read the manga, so it's all difference in opinions, but I'm just noting that the manga does show actually his memory slowly jogging back as he's pulling the clothes off, and it's that specific moment where he pulls the actual gloves off is where it basically hits him, oh, I remember this. And then that's when he pulls the recollection and then takes off the glasses, and then it's like, oh, it's been you all along. So that is one of the scenes that I kind of wanted just to point out, because I think it's an interesting scene from a manga perspective as well, sort of showing not just Rudy taking the clothes off, but him also remembering things and monologuing in the back of his mind. I'd say that's, yes, cut content, but it's just one of those where you kind of piece it together in your own mind. Now, the other thing though too, and this is very minor cut content, is when they are going through the forest, it shows that Ariel, well, not exactly show, but says that Ariel did hire a bunch of mages to create that storm, because of course Sylphiette talks to the ring and then the storm is created, but it emphasizes that Ariel did hire a bunch of mages to create the storm, and Rudy is actually removing the storm. He's actually fighting against them, and that's when Sylphiette needs to interfere and be like, hey, I'll use the staff and overpower it. It's just a little bit of like explaining of what Ariel's full scope and plan was with hiring the mercenaries or the magicians to create that storm and try to force it as much as possible. And that's when Rudy does know in the anime that, hey, this storm seems kind of fake, it's too quick, it's been made, and not fake in the sense, but you know what I mean, where it's like it's not a normal storm that's naturally occurred, it is something that's been forcefully made by magic. So those are the two scenes, or the couple of scenes that were cut between the light novels and then the anime. And then the last thing I want to talk about is some of the issues with the episode itself. Now, for me, I wasn't sure about them, because when I watched it, I thought it was just lag because of how I was watching the episode. But when watching it again, there are these still shot images when Fitz is walking into the cafeteria or the lunchroom, and it just shows everyone still, and it is very awkward, very jarring, and I don't think it's very well done. I think they should have at least shown some movement, maybe had less students but some movement, and I think that would have turned out a lot better. But for some reason they showed it as complete still shots, and even when Fitz is getting up to the group, Rosanaba, Rudy, and of course Baghetti as I call him, it still even shows them very still and them just kind of tilting their heads. So I don't think it was a very well done scene. I'd say that's one of the worst scenes done in the season. But if you take that issue away, along with, you know, some of the stuff from volume 7, then I said that I would have liked to see a little bit more polish. I overall enjoy this core of the season so far. I just think that one scene needs a bit of polish, and maybe they will do that in the Blu-ray. They might go back and add some bit more polish, maybe add a little bit more frames to kind of fix some of that jarring still shot and image theme. I think they will probably do that in the Blu-ray, along with possibility of some other stuff as well that I won't get into for spoiler reasons. So very much looking forward to the next episode of Mushoku Tensei. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you think of the cut content itself? Do you think it should have been in the anime? How critical do you think it's important? And what are your thoughts about that awkward, jarring scene with the cafeteria or the lunchroom and it just being like that? And also, I'd love to know your thoughts on what do you think of Sylphiette's kinkiness when she's describing the behavior and her desires of what she wants to do with Rudy to Ariel. So again, if you like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.